Okay, welcome everybody to Lunar Alchemy. So happy to be here with you today. My name is John. This is, of course, Bella. And we are going to be discussing today the transit through 39, gene key 39, and the archetype of the liberator. This one is particularly exciting for me because this is both my favorite and my most hated gene key. I don't know if we'll get into talking about that, but I'm looking forward to the way that this conversation may unfold because of how powerful this particular gene key is in the collective and what it means about where we're headed. Of course, gene key 39 goes from the shadow of provocation to the city of liberation. And the gift is the gift of dynamism. And we're looking at the abyss over the mountain, or water over the mountain. And this is such an incredible energy to contemplate, to embody, and I look forward to what we're going to achieve today in that direction. So Bella, I did not have any looming questions appear because this particular transmission today eluded me until literally 15 minutes ago. So it was very, very tricky for me to hone in onto the frequency. So I am wondering how you are tuning into this energy today and what your reflections are about it and where you might wish to begin our conversation.
Yeah, so as we're speaking, we have the sun in 39.5. So this is the fifth day that we are in these transits. We have felt the energies a bit. This happened to be my rising, my ascendant. So I definitely feel it today. It's very close in my case to my north node, which is the 39.6. So somehow this energy defines me. And I have looked in a little bit more this transit into the shadow because I was hosting a call with some of you that are here now earlier today. And really understanding that this energy comes from the root center, from the codon ring of seeking, from the adrenal system, and that it also is coding for the addiction to violence that we have in this reality. Whether that's the film industry or the porn industry, or even just the way that we are very good in our relationships to push the buttons in each other, to just know what's going to provoke the other person. And sometimes we can't even stop ourselves from doing it. And for me, that is part of that addiction to violence, that feeling of the adrenal system being activated. And somehow, every time we get triggered that way, we aren't free because we are in that thing with the other. So even if this is an individual gate from in the individual circuitry, yes, it is threatening our individual freedom, but it really is in the relationship with the other. And here we also see, when we look at where it is in the wheel, this is a Cancer gate. So it really is about caring, about nurturing with the other, about communicating with the other. But in the shadow, we actually have a kind of separation, because when we go to that place of provocation, we are creating a way of not coming together and not coming to the heart. So from separation, we want to come to caring, nurturing, and even a communication that's very different than pushing somebody's buttons. Yeah, that's where I want to start.
Yeah, I feel kind of inspired just to talk about the button pushing a little bit, because violence in and of itself affects all of our lives in one form or another. And for many people in the collective, at least in this country or in North America, it seems, larger expressions of violence in the world are a great shock to our systems, because it's so far out of the range of what we feel our reality is made from. But when we push buttons, or we have our buttons pushed, this is in a way a form of violence. And I love that you kind of started off by saying, you know, as long as we can be provoked, we're not experiencing the truth of freedom, which means we are not yet liberated from the trap of our being. And I think about this from a particularly, you know, like an individual standpoint. I think it's very easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to practice in my communication being cautious around other people's buttons and doing my best to not hit those buttons. But I find in that practice, there is this subtle manipulation of self-expression that prevents you from sharing your deepest inner truth of who you are, what you're about in this present moment with another person, as you navigate through the pathways of these buttons that you don't want to set off because you're like, ooh, being violent is bad. And it's like, I was thinking about how I think it's in the 64 Ways, Richard Rudd was describing that our entire universe is essentially made up of things that consume one another. There's nothing that we can see in our world that doesn't somehow eat, gobble up, or consume some other thing. And by definition, that is an act of violence. So I'm curious how you see that maneuvering pathway, Bella, in this context, and like what can we learn from the liberator, this archetype, about it?
Yeah, I actually feel that the 39, because it is in the root center and it's adrenal and it's an individual. So somehow it actually wants to provoke. There is something in it where it's made to provoke. And also because it is in the root center and it's not like in the mind or in the expression, it's not really through words. I think that there are other places of us, like my 6 lines or my 31, it's arrogance, that actually is using words to provoke the other. This 39 is more like me walking into a room, and just in my aura, there is something provoking about it. And I do see that when I was younger, I kind of tried to tone myself down because I realized there was something provoking about me. But now that I also have felt the flip side of it, I like the dynamism. And I think that also for me, the 39 goes very well together with the 3rd lines, because it's like, I'm going to poke just to see what happens. I'm going to walk in here this way just to see what happens. It actually enjoys doing it. And there's something impulsive. I think the words that we were using in Door was impulse, revival, and abundance. Those were the words that we chose last year for the archetype, because it has that. It wants to stare at the pot. And I was actually seeing a quote, I think it might be from the 64 Ways as well, where I wonder, something about, oh, maybe it wasn't, but it was this week at least. And it said, the people that you provoke that don't react are your people. And somehow that is very contrary to the 39. Because as 39 says, I'm poking because I know that there is liberation, abundance possible. And I can even see in myself, if I stir the pot and there's no kind of alchemical thing happening, I'm kind of bored. And for me, I think that that's connected to me being a 4th line, because if my truth doesn't get across, if I don't touch you, if there is not, if you know, then I'm not so interested. If I can't influence you, if I can't poke you, if nothing can happen, why am I even there? You know, so I do believe with this 39 that I don't even know. I think maybe in the repressive, it could go into something like that. What I have seen, and I know that there's some people with cancer activations here as well today, I've more seen the shadow of the 39 be to do anything for love, even die, to say, I know that the flood, the water can come down the mountain. I know it's possible, because that's the elements. I know it can. And then you stay forever in the name of love, and you over care for something that isn't even ready for it to open, because it's never, of course, we know through the Venus sequence and everything, you can never actually liberate somebody else. It's always, so that's more what I've seen as the shadow and we had that on the call today as well. One woman with the ascendant in the 39 that was speaking about in relationship, the care, the kind of self-care and the care for the other. And she's a 4-6 as well. So that's more what I have seen as the shadow than the tiptoeing. I don't actually feel that the 39 can tiptoe. Like the few people in our community that I know with a 39, like you could tiptoe as much as you want, but you're always going to be provoking.
Right. Even the act of being cautious around another person's buttons will actually do the work of pushing those buttons. Yeah, so true. And I don't have the 39 I don't have it anywhere in my human design chart, nothing. And yet I feel the tremendous power that this energy has on the collective and on myself as an individual. I mean, my entire sort of spiritual aspiration is essentially centered around this particular energy, and less in terms of liberation and simply more. I mean, sometimes when we talk about these energies, it gets very, very confusing because the shadow term provocation and the Siddhic term liberation, they're both like happening throughout the entire field of reality. So it's not like there's only provocation at the shadow level, but to move into a state of, to be liberated into a state of dynamism, to reconnect to that childhood innocent energetic expression. It's something that I personally connect with innocence because it's so obvious that it exists in a child who is still acting from their innocence. You can't miss it. The dynamism is just unmistakable. And when we become adults, or even just throughout the process of becoming an adolescent, or even a child beyond a certain age, we receive all of this conditioning that then crowds out our connection to that inner innocence, from which it's so recognizable what that dynamism is about. And so I think to a certain extent, personally for me, I find myself seeking dynamism, that both in myself and in opportunities to guide or liberate, help provoke the liberation in others into their own form of dynamism. And in saying that out loud, I think about it and I'm kind of like, like that's pretty funny, because I don't have any part of this 39 in my chart, but if you do the master numbers numerology, my life path numerological number is 55, which is freedom. And as Richard is talking about how the collective may soon begin to manifest this 39th city, because in order to reach our way towards freedom, we first have to be liberated, which means that the 39 is this great precursor. And I wonder if Bella, I wonder how you see the prevalence of this shadow, like really kind of driving this whole machine that we're a part of humanity, like on the largest scale that, I can't think of another gene key that is more pervasive at this point on the global level. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but I'd be curious to hear what you see there.
Yeah, what I see in front of me as I hear you is that in that codon ring, in that pressure of the root centers of the codon ring of seeking, where we have a lot of those root gates plus the 15 that can be very extreme in the G center. I believe that all those, you can think about the 54, for example, the pushing upwards, but it's greed. If we take the greed and then the violence, it's kind of, we have those two, and then we can see, like in the shadow frequency, we can see a lot of what's going on in the world. So definitely the human beings were seeking something, but if we get stuck in that frequency and we live it out, like, yeah, it's pervasive, it's what you are saying. And I think it lays, like, even this dissatisfaction, if we look at it's 58, like a lot of what's happening in the root center, it's that fuel. And what do we use it for? Do we use it in a destructive way or in a constructive way? That's really what I see. And I often look at the other archetypes. And if you go to 64 doors, you're going to see a little bit of a different lens that I guess I'm doing more and more now. But last year or 2 years ago, I was already called to look at the astrological part of this, where we have the root center, we have the 39 on one side in Cancer, on the other side we have the 38, which is the Capricorn, which is the programming partner in the wheel, the opposite. And then the 38 is connecting to the 28 in Scorpio, that is going to the splenic center. For me, those three archetypes are really working together. And the 28 comes in and says, what's the purpose? And what's the purpose? And I feel like that's really in the codon ring of seeking, when we bring in that purpose, when we bring in the depth as well of that. Because even the 39, somehow, I guess sometimes it can be a little bit superficial. The way we speak about Cancer is that it's the surface of the water, kind of where light, suns come in, life is really trickling out and happening there. And then Scorpio is the deeper waters. So there is something where I believe that we need to bring in these archetypes, and how the 28, the 30, and the 39 work together. That kind of assures that we're not just staying in this, I guess there is, on some level, there must be some meaning with being stuck in the greed and the violence. But at the same time, I believe that we're waking up to a purpose that is not only individual, even if this whole thing is individual, it starts with individual. So when we wake up to our purpose, we look at the world and then we kind of tune into our own creative life force, and then we go out in the world and we provoke something different. And that's why I am not somebody who's even consuming the news or too much about the stock market or the economy. Yeah, of course, I realize I can see that things are more expensive, and I wonder sometimes where it's going to lead. But the more I focus on that, I think that the liberation and the effortlessness, like the liberation of the 39, the effortlessness of the 38, and the purpose and meaning, and the ability to take risks because it's fun, are all going to be closed down if I focus too much on that. So
yeah, it's such an interesting thing to think about, how the world stage can provoke us in particular ways. And, as we look and see the divisiveness in the world becoming more and more extreme in some ways, that provokes in people responses to that divisiveness. And I think it's playing a humongous role in people beginning to awaken to the truth of who they really are, on whatever level is being served by that. We've just had in this country the the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. I was talking about that the other day with Kelly on her page about how does this relate to freedom. And while we were talking about freedom, of course, the idea of liberty came up. And people's responses to all of these shifts and changes are being provoked in very, very like strong ways. And, you know, on the collective level, it appears that there is a lot more life force energy. Every time something like that happens, there's a lot more life energy being focused into some form of new creation, whatever that is. And it almost seems that from looking at that, we could take on this idea that every time my buttons get pushed, it's teaching me something about my own life force energy and the direction and where it's coming from and what frequency of energy is moving it. You know, if we are provoked and we move into reactivity, well, you know, perhaps we're angry and we are going to have to practice something to liberate that anger from the tissues of our bodies. Or if we find ourselves frozen in fear, perhaps we have to find a way to get angry so that there's some movement of that lower frequency energy in us. And we can then direct it into something that's more constructive, as you were pointing out that, yes, how do we use this energy? Is it constructive or destructive? And it feels like everybody out there in the world who is working on their buttons on one level or another, they're in a deep process of learning and understanding more about themselves. And as that process occurs, the deconditioning process is actually happening almost as like a byproduct. And as that deconditioning continues, then more of that life force gets liberated into their world, and a person can begin to choose to do what they love. You know, it's like on the political scene, you see people provoked to protest. And on some level, I think about those people and I'm like, how many people are actually truly suited to protest? Like from their energetic system. Is this truly something that they love doing? Or is it something that they do out of the provocation of the new environment in which they are experiencing their perception of freedom is collapsing? And what is the way in which that life force could be liberated from that process to begin to create the world that they love? And I'm not saying that protesting doesn't fulfill that, but I'm curious about that process. And just really in any way, when a person moves out of reactivity, how is it that we can liberate that reactive energy and redirect it into something that is geared towards something that we truly love? And Bella, I'm wondering if the liberator archetype has something about that, or if there's somewhere else to look in the system.
Yeah, it feels that kind of felt complex.
Yes, I would say so.
I mean, I definitely feel that there is something, as we know that this 39 is the harmonic 8 to the 55, and the 55 is prophecy of where we're going, where a lot of things are going to have to break down. We're also going from a first line reality where everything is very detailed and and very supposed to be very safe, you know, everything that it has been for the last 400 years, where we're trying to create this platform where we trust our institutions, and we have the specializations in doctors, and like looking at the body also in a very specific way. And all that is changing and shifting into 6-line reality. So it's even not like, because the global cycles are going the other way than the planets, we're actually going from, it's not that we're going line 1, line 2 and kind of building, we're going backwards from a first line, it goes to 6th line. And that's where we are. And so when we have the 39 that's connected to the 55, for me, it feels like an acceptance of what needs to fall apart. And a lot of these ways of coming together is because we feel unsafe. So if I am part of this church, or part of this group, or part of Greenpeace, or part of the vegans, or part of the Republicans, or, you know, whatever it is, like if I'm part of this, then I can feel a little bit safer, because then I belong to something. And the whole thing with the individual circuitry and the cross of the sleeping phoenix that we're going into, as we are moving into the first to the 6th line reality from the first line reality, is very individual. It's very, very individual. It's integration circuitry 34 and 20, and then it's the 55 and the 59. So it's like we can use all these crutches to try to feel safer and feel like we belong, but in the individual circuitry, at the end of the day, you are alone. And that is what I often speak about as existential despair. And somehow the existential despair is going to stir us. And, you know, people are speaking in the chat here about the intensity of the 28. Yeah, it often takes you to the floor. It makes you face the devil, or whatever archetypes you're the most afraid of, you know, yourself maybe. And it's gonna take you there. And in that, there is a liberation. So again, I do not feel at this level of existential transmutation, alchemy in the world, in the prophecy of, you know, where we're going, I do not feel like there is a flip side, what we can do to kind of break through and get from this to this. I actually do believe that it goes deep to that melancholy, mutation, existential despair, intensity. We are here in the spirit that is like moving up through us. The harmonic gate, the channel of emoting, but it's also the channel of the spirit that arises in us. So when you, like you're saying, when the energy is starting to move and the breath is taking us, this is where we are, and that's the freedom. I don't think that we can ever shift that in a conscious way. It is really about an alchemy that starts happening in us when we surrender to not being able to hold on to anything anymore.
Yeah, so it truly points toward the mystical processes of the evolution of both an individual and of the evolution of our human species as a collective, which is both it's both wonderful from the perspective of the 39 and in some ways maddening. I think it's wonderful because if we can add presence into our experience of our own life force energy, and we can be with that fully, then there's no need to even try to direct our pathway towards a certain result or end or anything like that. Simply with our focus of awareness in that life force, all of those things will be provoked from us by following that innate innocence, by following that innate love that we may carry. And at the same time, as we move along that path, our awareness is going to be constantly grabbed at from various forms of distraction. in order to kind of like pull us back down as we're moving in, as we're choosing our pathway by focusing on our present moment and in our present energetic movement. And as those distractions happen, or as those provocations happen along the way, it's like this, it's this incredible test of who we are as a human being. Are we able to hold our focus within this intensely pressured situation? And, you know, thinking about the energies that are present here, when we look at the I Ching, it's the water over the mountain, and yet it's called obstruction. And when I think about that, it's like, well, you know, what's happening right now in the mountains? The snow caps are melting. The water just flows down. There's actually no obstruction that stops the water from happening. But Bella, you were kind of talking about this upward movement of spirit. And this is also what the mountain is. When we did Earth over Mountain in, I think that's Gene Key 15, with that upward pressure of the mountain from beneath the earth, causing life to burst forth and flower. Here we have the upward pressure with the abysmal above it, which is a downward force. So we have these two forces like squishing down on each other and like bringing all of this pressure. And when you move out of the realm of our physical elements with just these forces, then that is where obstruction occurs. This upward force pushing up and this downward force pushing down, and they're meeting in the middle. So I'm wondering how you see these elements in terms of our discussion as we've kind of gotten to it at where we are now. Like, what's going on with these forces that is kind of like relating to all of this?
I go back to Cancer and the perception, and maybe the perception comes from the mother in a way, because Cancer is the mother archetype, it's the moon archetype, and the moon is always going to be there close to the earth. It's always going to be there and illuminate, and it's going to go through its phases, but it's always there, and it's pulling the waters as the tides. So it's going to provoke the waters of the earth. And I feel that possibly what I was saying in the beginning with that part of the shadow frequency, a mother is not going to abandon the child because there is this unconditional love. You know, it is service to other by that unconditional love. And I do feel that there can be something like that. It's not really idealistic in the same way that, for example, the 11 would be. There is something from the heart that you can feel that it is that liberation is possible. I think that the 39 can feel that. It sees, like I was saying before, the water coming down the mountain, like somebody's holding on to so much, whether it is, you know, repression, whether it is trauma, you know, you like, that's something that Cancer can see, and it can see what's possible if that water gets to just like flow out of the volcano or flow out of what's been held on to. And I think that in our human relationships that aren't only mother and child, that sometimes just because we can see the possibility of that liberation, we stay there and we infuse something that actually can't be received. And that's where there can be a mismatch when you stay for something that isn't, like, they say it's a gestation. It's always a gestation when we speak about the moon and the mother. And I can see that kind of, we say that Taurus energy and earth energy is kind of stubborn, but there can be a stubborn love in these archetypes. And there can be a very stubborn love in Scorpio as well, you know, that's going to stay through the betrayal, it's going to stay through the worst, because it feels like water is always like, there's always the hope of the nurturance of the water. And I feel that that's what the water sign sometimes it's kind of, it's keeping you drowning. And in the call that we did today, I was feeling very much like energy here. And it felt like that kind of line of demarcation where the care for you, the care for the other, it's kind of that place that says, are you going to drown yourself, or are you going to live? When does a mother maybe let go of the child in order so she doesn't drown herself? There's something that's, for me today, feels strong with this archetype and the geometry of the water and the mountain.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking about pressure and how impossible it would be for, or maybe not impossible, but how difficult it would be for a mother to resist the internal unconscious pressure to love her child. And I think Richard
okay, but
talked.
this is the important, like now I kind of feel my mom, and like I feel like a lot of energy here. My mom has the 55 and the 39, and I have the 39, and I could give my life to liberate her. I could give, like I have the 28 and the 38. I could give, because this is water energy. I could give even until almost the last drop of blood to liberate her. And that's, I think, the difference, to learn to love without the need to liberate. Like, I think that that's a huge lesson for the 39. How can I love, and how can I understand that sometimes it doesn't require anything more? Like there's something here where I'm feeling something, speaking to me, and I can't really put words on it yet, but there is a slightly like differentiation in, how to love. And the warrior, because it's adrenal, always wants to, it's in action in the world. Like, Richard Rudd says, when this archetype comes into the world, it's gonna alchemize, it's gonna catalyze, it's going to move. But there is something where the 39, we can see also, if we think mountain is stillness, right? And then the water is about devotion. So here we can see that devotion to stillness is what liberation is. So if I can think about my mom, the devotion to stillness, it's different than me like traveling around the world and doing anything I can, because my love to her is kind of measured and proven by how well I can liberate her from the pain, the sickness, the victimization, whatever is the things that she's holding on her shoulders. But that in a way is not the responsibility of the 39. The responsibility of the 39 is to love unconditionally.
Yeah, I believe what you're describing is the breakthrough that exists between being at the highest frequency of the gift and finally breaking through into the siddhi. Once the siddhic state descends, there is no longer seeking. And so it is complete stillness there. And, while you were talking about that, I was like, yes, the pressure to love is a form of seeking. And when we recognize that love exists despite our action, that love exists simply because of our presence, simply because of our attention, simply because of the fact that we're here, there's no longer seeking involved with love. And it's completely transforms the feeling of love. How do we feel about love? It's kind of hard to believe, with all of the conditioning that we've received about what love is and what love isn't, that the true nature of love could be so still and so without activity, without seeking. And it's such a, when I my experience of a form of liberation in my consciousness feels so well described by this entire gene key that, you know, the transformation that happens is like you're seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking, and then suddenly, despite your seeking, not because of your seeking, despite your seeking, it all, like, everything just kind of like falls away. And then what's left is the inherent nature of being, of presence, of awareness, of consciousness. And when we recognize that as love itself, it completely transforms the entire experience. And interestingly, when we think about this in relationship to the 55, in order for our consciousness to move from way up here down into the solar plexus, in terms of our brain center, where are we going to move from, it is that exact same movement that transfers the locality of the consciousness within our biology. And that it's like water flowing down a mountain. It's just like effortless. Instead of climbing the mountain, it goes the other way. Really, really incredible. Well, Bella, do you have any final thoughts on the Liberator and this incredible gene key that we've been, I very much enjoyed this discussion. It was entirely unexpected in terms of where we would go. And I found a great surprise in how your sharing brought us to that moment of tying this into the true nature of love and where that comes in with all of this, because it just, I don't know, it just feels so right.
Yeah, I feel like there would be another kind of fountain on the mountain if I go into it again. So I feel like I'm just gonna let that process of, yeah, definitely there's energy here, because we are also in the emotional wave, which is like a kind of roller coaster with the 55 and the 39. And I feel that part of my journey has been to try to tame that, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I would leave it as this. I just had the image as well as how this is expressed then up in the 2212, you know. So there's also something when we allow somebody to actually have their own experience with the hope and despair, which would be my mom, you know, there is something that she's expressing to the world through either that dishonor or that grace of the 22 up to that purity of the 12. So somehow, even in the way that the individual circuitry expresses itself in the world, kind of needs to have that whole alchemy of hope and despair, of the waves, of the waters, of the tides in the 3955 to actually come up and be expressed in the 2212. So again, it feels like, yeah, it is good for it to actually slow down a little bit, because that can actually help with all of the violence, with the fixing that came up now in the end, with the staring just for the sake of staring. So yeah, and that's the 52 that comes in, the mountain that comes in and brings that. So yes.
Beautiful. And before we go, while you were talking, I don't know how this popped into my awareness, but I wanted to share a little bit about the transmission that we're going to be doing today with our members. And it's a water-based transmission But I was thinking about the breath, and Richard is talking about the breath reaching all the way down to the base of our root. And I realized in that exact same place, there's an abyss, a pool of life force energy that exists in our system. And the abyss is the downward force. And coiled up just underneath that is the upward rising source of Kundalini energy. And I had never considered that in relationship to this one. But when we think about the idea of liberation, that movement of Kundalini from the base up to the crown, that is the movement of liberation. It's maybe not what causes it, but I just wanted to kind of toss that out there as like, oh, this is part of the whole spiritual energetic body. Nug?
I just need to show this because I feel like you're speaking about it. So here we have the symbol or the character for the 39, and it's looking down the abyss. That's the element, that's the water element. So it's looking down in the abyss. And somehow my interpretation of this is that it can see the liberation. It can see exactly what you're saying, how it's coming up. And the word that's used for it in Abaxis, in Sergio's way, it's to foresee. Because that's what I'm saying, with the 39, it foresees the liberation. And sometimes we can stand there forever looking down the abyss to foresee the spirit that's coming up. But at that moment, like this is the individual circuitry. So we're not really here to look at the liberation in the other, even if Cancer always kind of does that. But if we go back to really where it is and how it moves in our body, it's foreseeing our own liberation. And somebody was writing in the chat as well, the self-liberation. So with the 39, I guess it's bringing it back first and foremost to your own circuitry, so your own, foreseeing your own liberation. But I just feel like, I don't even think you've seen this, John, so that you were speaking to this image. I just felt like I had to share it.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that. So we'll leave it there. I love this discussion. Thank you to everyone for joining us. If you find yourself desiring to engage with our transmissions, just reach out to Bella or myself, and we will send you a link to be able to enjoy those. July 13th is that right, Bella? The full moon?
I don't remember. I think it's the 13th. Yeah, I think that's the date. Yeah, it was yeah, it kind of, that would be 2 weeks from the 28th. So that's probably right.
Yeah. So Bella and I are looking at doing a full moon session of Lunar Alchemy, where we will both talk about the transits going on, but also the full moon nature of it. And we'll be offering a transmission for everyone who attends. So I want to invite everybody who's here to look out for in your emails for the announcement around that, so that you can attend and receive the benefit of that frequency as it is delivered. So I look forward to seeing you all. I believe it's next week on Monday, back on our regular time. I don't think we're going to miss a transit in between now and then. We've got one more to go before that starts happening. But so next Monday at our regular time at 3 p.m. Eastern, we'll be back with you again for another discussion. So sending loving presence to each of you. I'll look forward to seeing our members here in just a moment as we open up the other room. So bye-bye for now.